We had some officers in the air navigation office there. It was pretty nice people. Edgar was. We had at one time there, we had a guy who had been a captain on a short carrier, and he was all right. And there was a forester from Wisconsin named Mac Williamson, was a real great guy. And Mac, every now and then, he'd come to me and say, "Chief, would you take me over to the Chief's Club for dinner tonight?" He says, I'm hungry. I ain't had no good food in a long time. Of course, they had the Officers Club and all that, but I don't guess it's too good. So I'd take him over there, and boy, we had the very best there. America could take his insignia off so he wouldn't embarrass nobody. And he took him in there as a guest. He was an all right guy. Getting back to Ray Dooley, who had told me how much he disliked me when they had to promote me to chief. He kept badgering the commanding officer, Ed Greer, to teach him to fly. Well, we had a Howard trainer assigned to us. That was just so the officers could get their flight time in. So Greer had taken him out, checking him out on how to fly. And Greer had he's very, very time-heavy. He'd flown Pan American for years and other airlines, and he'd been in the Navy, flying Navy planes for an awful long time. So he had a lot of time. So they're out in this Howard trainer, and Ray Dooley is flying, and he clips out the top of a tree there in Hawaii. So knocked the tail wheel off of the aircraft. So it was quite embarrassing for Ed because he had to assume the guilt, and he wasn't guilty. Here's a man with several thousand hours flying time, and he had to go and say that he got careless and knocked the tail wheel off the Howard trainer. That's the only way they could decently get out of it. It was not authorized. So I, being a little smug on that, every time after I find out about it, every time I see Redu, I smile real big at him. I don't know if he caught on what I was smiling at, I guess he did. We had a bunch of old Seabees there that kept up all the boiler rooms and hot water supplies and things of that sort. And we had this big stage show over there. Some of the Viston people from Hollywood come over, including an old-time actor named Eddie Bracken. He was a pretty good comic. And they had all this group of seats roped off down there for the officers, which is understood. Nobody expects it to be any differently. They must have had too many of them because there's an awful lot of them vacant. And there's a lot of guys, white hats, standing up way back. What they'd done, they took bulldozer and pushed up a big mound of earth and put some wooden benches on it and made seats for theater. So old Eddie Bracken, he looks out there and he sees all these guys standing up, and he says, just for once, he said, why don't you guys come down here? The officers won't mind. Come down and fill up these vacant seats. At which time some smart-ass officer, he jumps up on the stage and says, we do mind. Stay where you are. So Eddie and him gets in a ruckus up there, battering back and forth. And he says, all right, he says, the show's shut down. So he must have been fair-sized officer, so he did shut the show down. So we had about 3 of these types of theaters all over the place. So Eddie says, all right, you guys, come over to the other one, and we'll be over there in a few minutes. So we go over there, and the same damn officer was over there, and he jumped up on the stage again, and he says, there won't be no show. So one of these old Seabees, who must have been 65 years old, he hollers down so he wouldn't see who done it. Says, you going to bathe in cold water tonight? So they sabotaged all the hot water plants on the whole station.
So that made them mad, so they set off a big investigation as to why that had occurred. And they'd go into these places, and these OCBs there be hammering and working, trying to get the thing restored. So they let them go without hot water about 2 nights, and they got it all fixed up. I don't know if he learned anything or not, but we had a hearty respect for Eddie Bracken after that. The chief petty officers were allowed Class A passes, which didn't require them to be on the station at night if they didn't want to. And old aforementioned Jarvis, he tells me that I'm not entitled to one. So I go around and go to the squadron, who was commanded by a guy named Commander Hallenbach, who was an old-time airplane pilot. And I asked permission to see him, told him I wanted a Class A pass, which he directs his yeoman to make me one. So I'm downtown Honolulu, and I met Wayne Jarvis down there. Wayne says, he said, you got a problem. Says, you're outside and ain't supposed to be. And I said, you can go to hell. And I said, I got a Class A pass just like every other chief on this station. So that's the end of that conversation. He didn't have no guts to speak of. One day we had a horrendous rush. In fact, it had to do with a change in an invasion plan up there somewhere in the Pacific, and we were making, I guess you'd have to class them as provisional maps. It was made in a hurry and made right now. We made an enormous run on it, and all the hands was working on it. Wasn't drafting on it or whatever. You were counting maps and putting them in packets and so on. So it was a mighty job. We had worked about 20-odd hours. We had to have some another preliminary run the next day to do with it, and in fact, Admiral Hall's personal plane was waiting to take these maps up to where they're supposed to go, 2,000 or 3,000 miles away. So I needed some type matter printed up, and we had a typographer there who was a first-class petty officer named Zahner. And he's an old guy, and everybody called him Pappy. So I go around and told Pappy I had to have a rush type order. And Pappy says, can't do it. He says, I'm printing up 2,000 and something tickets to an officer's dance on the station. And I says, how about knocking off on that and do my type for me? He says, I got to have these today. And I said, well, I got to have this today too. So why don't you do mine? It won't take you maybe a couple of hours to do the type. And then I said, I'll even come in here and help you any way I can to continue on your project. So the personnel officer, a guy named Hesse, he acted just like his name sounds, not very good. So he had brown-nosed the base, and the base commander he had volunteered the services of our office to make tickets to the officers' dance, and that was the deal on that. So while Zahner, Pappy, is printing my type, he came in to see how his project was going on, and he sees him doing rush Navy work instead of doing the officers' dance work. He got livid. So he hunted me up, and boy, he read the riot act to me, and he got me mad. And I know he was a civil service sort, you know. He didn't have no military background or anything else. So I listened to him a little while, and he'd tell me, what are you going to do to him? And I said, I don't think you're military enough to do it, but you go ahead if you want to. I said, I don't think you got a chance. I said, I'm in here on this rush job. And if you think that printing them tickets to the officers' dance is more important, well, you just go ahead and court-martial me, and you'll have to explain that. So along about that same period of time, some old-timer there, Chief, told me that, he said, what you want to do to stymie that organization over there, says, get yourself a permanent appointment to chief. He says, the chief of naval personnel signs that, and says when he signs it, he says they won't never court-martial because they can't do it without his approval. Says they can convict you, but it says it'd take them 2 years to get it through the chain of command and get it back there and get it approved, and it'd have to be an awful strong case at that. So I later did that, and it served me well when I was recalled during the Korean War. I oftentimes felt that was a valuable thing to have. I thought highly of it anyway, and I don't know, it wasn't randomly known. Nobody ever said anything about it being available, and you had to get your commanding officer to do it, put you in for it. So it wasn't, it didn't happen every day. One day the evacuation squadron coming out of some of the war fronts, I believe this was out of the Palos, Peleliu or some of those sort of places, had brought a load of wounded Marines in, and they had loaded up this ambulance plane with, I don't know how many ever they held, 50 or 60, I guess, on stretchers. And the crew gets aboard and they take off, and as was customary, they would go out there and fly the radio range out of Hawaii there for about hour, 2 hours or so, and when they got far enough out, of course the range leg would be so wide it wouldn't confine them much, so they'd switch to other types of navigation. So all them planes had a navigator aboard. So the captain, the plane commander, gets out there as far as he's supposed to, and he calls the intercom for the navigator to take over, and the navigator didn't have his maps. So they had to turn, they was out there then and used up enough gasoline till they wouldn't dare risk coming back and getting his maps and taking off again without refueling. So you see all these ambulances start lining up, and all the Packard 120s, which the brass had, and they were coming down to investigate how this could happen. And they parked all the, unloaded the plane, put them in the shade, put all the wounded in the shade, and refueled the plane. And they put another navigator aboard who had his maps. I don't know what happened to the other one. I don't know if he got sent to ADAC or not. Maybe he did. Should have been. So they didn't take them things real lightly. This one day I see a B-29 come in. The B-29 landed at the Naval Air Station because it had bigger and better runways and did Hickam Field. So they would, if need be, they could taxi from Hickam Field to the Naval Air Station. But they set up their necessary apparatus over there to accept landings of these big airplanes there. So this B-29 landed, and I noticed all the big wheels out there. And it was, instead of him coming out through the expected entrance to the airplane exit, he comes out from underneath. And was Doolittle. So all these bunch of glad-handers ran out there to shake his hand and all that, which I felt that he could have cared less about. He was on one of his early flights in the B-29s to inspect the situation out there. So all these periods of time, we'd be making maps like Iwo Jima. We didn't know what was taking place there. We know there'd been a battle there, but we were making airport-type charts, and the Seabees was up there gouging out a strip. Didn't have much of a place. They said to save a great many B-29s had been shot up or run out of fuel or something and couldn't get back to their appropriate bases. Then one of the most elaborate things I remember working on looked about like DIA does out here. And that was Saipan. They put in the mightiest base there that you could imagine. It had parallel runways, water to water. And this is the first time I ever seen the word approach control. Had so many airplanes going out there that they did have an approach control on Saipan. So it became a real big base. And we worked on all the others too many to name, some of which never became important, and some which became very important. Our offices at the Naval Air Station were in the balcony of the nose bay hangars. So they had two nose bay hangars, one on either side of this building, and they would accommodate probably 10 or 15 airplanes on each side. And they had another big new hangar which had about the same number. Then they had portable nose bays stuck around the fringes of the field where they could work on them, and had little shelters over them so the engine portion would be under shelter. So they had a real busy place there. At one period of time, my roommate was a guy named Hudgens from Tacoma, Washington. And he was the line chief there at night. And he was working nights when I knew him anyway. And they would work on airplane engines hot. Turnaround type maintenance. And they never cooled down. They had that much going on. Give a little history. The Naval Air Transport Service contracted for and was delivered 100 C-54s, R-5Ds, to the Navy. So they come out of the war with all of them except 6, I believe, which is an extraordinary record. Of the 6 that they didn't get back with, some ensign that had just got out of R-5D school landed one with the wheels up on Canton Island. That took care of that. There's a cow right in front of one in Guam, and got away from them, and all the crews walked away from both of them, and then the one that was landed on Canton Island. Okay. One plane hit a mountain on Guam. The highest point on Guam was about 1,300 feet. The Coral Mountain was wiped out there, and they lost a crew on that one. And then one hit a typhoon off the Philippines someplace and went down, but they walked out of the jungle. So they had, all in all, they had pretty good luck. They had an enviable record as compared to the Air Force. They lost a great many of them. Of course, it was many times bigger. In the R-5D section alone, I expect they were probably had 1,000 at least, maybe more than that. I know one time they grounded all of them at one time out there. All the Air Force ones, as fast as they fly in, they ground them. One crew had give a big overhaul there, and had not completed the job, and nobody knew it. And the engineering record or something was fouled up, and they hadn't bolted the wings on properly. Left a lot of bolts out. It wasn't complete. So they took one off out there and went in, lost a wing. So they grounded the whole shebang of them. I never seen so many airplanes, and of course it was worldwide. It wasn't just there, but I never seen so many R-5s anywhere as was stashed around there. So it took quite some time for this investigation. They first thought it might be sabotage or something. And had another good, they had contract operators flying B-24s. It's called, let's see, Consolidated Airways. And they had civilian pilots on them. and some crew, military crew, was supposed to gas this thing up. It'd come in from somewhere, have it ready. And it coincided exactly with them, their shift being over, so somebody or other says, let the shift that's coming on now gas it up. We're tired. So the shift that's coming on didn't pay no attention because they thought that the ones that just went off would gas it up, and crew gets aboard the thing with a military cargo going someplace, and they didn't, like idiots, didn't check far enough. So they got out there 300 or 400 miles, and all of our tanks went dry at the same time, and they didn't have enough gasoline left to make an approach. And I guess they went to switching tanks and found out that all of them are about the same, 2 gallons in each or something. So they made a landing, a very rough landing out there at sea, and broke the plane up. They got a rescue craft out there and rescued most of the people. But that set off a big investigation. It well should have. One of our guys one day, after mail call, was standing in the hallway, leaning up against the door down there, reading a letter. And he hears a voice say to him over his shoulder, "What are you reading, son?" And without looking up, he said, "I got a letter from my wife. I've got a new son." So the guy says, "Let me have the letter." He looks around, it was Admiral Halsey. So he goes in a great quake, I guess, but he hands him a letter. So Halsey puts it up against the bulkhead in the wall and wrote his name across it, William F. Halsey. He says, "Show that to him when he gets grown." So Halsey has a human side, and of course was an egomaniac too. I used to get a kick out of, I don't know where the Pacific edition of the Stars and Stripes is put out, but it must not have been put out there. It probably is put out in the coast someplace. Didn't know what was going on. Headlines in the Stars and Stripes say, Halsey stalks the China coast. And over on the Kihei Beach, had a big halter-type line dividing the beach from officers' country to enlisted country. And you'd look across over there, and old Halsey would be laying over there in the sun. And he had 2 nurse girlfriends at the same time. So somebody other up and cracked it. He's stalking the China coast, all right. He was an old devil, I guess. And on one occasion, he's tattooed absolutely all over the head. And he made some crack about, "Show me a man that ain't got no tattooing, and I'll show you a man that's got some bad habits." My favorite story concerning him was in one of the big battles that they were in down there. He was with them at that time. He was awakened, as would be customary, and was told that there's an enemy ship on the port side of us, and there's an enemy ship on the starboard side. And Halsey's answer to him was, "Pick out the biggest one and start shooting." Our nose bay was the windows looking out over the nose bay and down to the main place where the seaplanes came in, where the land plane ramp was, where the notables got off. You'd see the commotion around there. Usually the staff cars start arriving. You know, somebody big coming in. So old Ernest Powell came in, and you always could tell somebody big is coming when the photographers go sliding up. And Henry Luce, passed through, and the head of the ways, Mrs. McAfee, she came in on the Mars, and the dock for the Mars is down there. I don't think the Mars ever done much of anything worthwhile. They were big, but it took about 15 men to crew one, and nothing was on, mainly on the run hauling notables. Eleanor came through, but she went out to the front lines, and some of them Marine invasions out there, I guess they dreaded to see her coming. And, of course, Roosevelt and MacArthur met there. They weren't very friendly. I guess Roosevelt had caused him to be sent out of the country, and he had never gotten back. But anyway, they met there, and Roosevelt was on the, I believe, the Toledo, one of the big cruisers anyway. And he got real mad because the agricultural authorities in the port there wouldn't let him bring his dog ashore. And they had to go through quarantine for 30 days. This made him awful mad, so he left it on the ship. And these enterprising sailors, they went and caught old Fowler and cut little locks of his hair off and was selling to each other. And when he got back and seen his dog, I guess there's a bunch of them probably wished they were transferred. And he was awful mad, they said. The armament people were loading great big cases of rockets and other similar type material into an R5. And he had all these shells on pallets on forklifts. And here comes in a fighter plane of some kind of Corsair, I believe. And he let it get away from him. And he ran right between two of these forklifts and ran under the belly of the airplane, which was loaded with all them rockets. That was right down underneath our window, which didn't make you feel very comfortable. But the fire department was so efficient, they got out there and got foam all over that whole thing before fire retardant, before anything happened. And the airplane belly was torn up badly, the big R5 was, and the fighter plane was shambles, and they got out of that one pretty good. One day I was instructed to go and get a rush shipment of maps that was coming in. And there had been messages back and forth concerning it, and nobody knew exactly what they were, so they was addressed to us. I had to go get them. So I took a flatbed trailer and truck and went to the main docks at Pearl Harbor. And if I was to live to be 120 years old and visited all of them in the world, I don't guess there's any, unless it was the invasion of Europe, that there'd ever been anything any bigger than that. So we drove and drove and drove in there. I've never seen so many different types of things in my life. So we went through a place there, and I got to admit it was real efficient. I still am not certain how they did it. It must have been by telephone. They didn't have walkie-talkies then. But we was given a number, and there's some color coding involved in it. So the driver was told to follow the blue or the yellow, as the case might be, and you will arrive at your destination. So I kept wondering, how can they do that? So we meandered back through 3 or 4 miles of covered docks and uncovered docks and everything else. And we get over there, here sits a forklift with this big box on it. And it had the same number on it as we had on our orders going in there. So they loaded that thing on, and we took it back to the office, unloaded it. Guess what it was? Survival maps of the North Pole area. We sure did need them. Speaking of survival maps, there were some real nice ones. They were printed on silk of a durable quality and would hold water, rainwater, should you be lost at sea. They would serve as a sail that you could rig up. They were rather large maps, and they served many purposes. I suppose you could even use them for shelter, rain gear if you had to. Some of them are quite nice. Had detailed local maps of the countryside involved. I remember in particular the one on Burma. Some of those places had excellent ones. Ferry began to be forced down in the jungle country there, and that would help a little bit towards getting you out, as far as knowing where you were and so on. You know, the island of Oahu and some of the other islands in the Hawaiian chain were very vine covered, vegetation covered. On one occasion, the B-24 landed with the wheels up on vegetation, and the people survived. I remember being up above Schofield Barracks one time, seeing smoke come from the locale up there, and I asked some of the Army people what the deal was up there. Said there'd been a C-47 went in there, but they never even got into it. They searched, but they could never find it. It went into the, I guess the rain took the smoke away pretty soon, the fire. And by the time they got in there, they couldn't find it. So it's down in those vines someplace. There's places there where you can sit for a long period of time till the sun gets right and you can see a little opening down below with the sun shining on the rock or ground. Sometimes the natives sit there until a wild hog comes through in their spirit through those type of places. I always thought it was extremely unique. They had gun emplacements all over a lot of those high peaks in Hawaii. You know, the island of Oahu is an extinct volcanic cone. The mountainous ranges on two sides of it haven't been part of the old crater. The other two sides, which are no longer present, crumbled and disappeared into the sea millions of years ago. But its center, where Schofield Barracks and Honolulu and all that type thing is, all the flatlands, was the old center of the old volcano. There's some pretty interesting historic facts around there, political facts. When the treaty was signed making Hawaii part of the United States, and when they talked about putting up a naval base there, the local royal family who ruled Oahu and the rest of the islands at that time, the Kamehameha families, told them they didn't want to build no naval base there. Said it was an evil place. Said something dire will happen to you if you build a naval base there. I don't know how many people thought about that when Pearl Harbor come along, but maybe they knew something that nobody else didn't believe. I was out there when the last member of the ruling family died. It was a princess, and they buried her up there at his royal burial place up the old highway towards the Pali. It's very well kept, beautiful royal palms there, and so on. So the royals were buried there. And if you go up a little bit further, and if it's raining, you see, if it has been raining, you see an extraordinary sight. It is the upside-down waterfall. The waterfall originates in a stone catch basin, falls several hundreds of feet, and the wind is constant down at the bottom of it. So the wind picks it up and twists it back up and dissipates it into the atmosphere. So the profile view of it is quite spectacular. The road is very winding going up to the Pally. And the Pally is a cliff which I won't begin to estimate how far it is straight off, but it's a great distance. And that is where King Kamehameha and his warriors defeated a coalition of the other island kings. Each island, it seems, had its own king. So they engaged in a battle there, and Kamehameha's people forced the enemy over these cliffs. That was the end of them. I used to take a bus and take liberty parties of the GIs up there. And there was a dairy farm down at the bottom of the Pally, so we'd wind off down there by the dairy farm and always stop. Let them country boys smell some more of that cow manure. In and around high water, you occasionally would run into one in particular big Japanese internment camp. Of course, they had a high percentage of Japanese Americans living out there when the war came along, and of course Roosevelt and the FBI rounded them up and interned them, and they may have been just as loyal as anybody else, but that's how things were. They kept them under non-climbable barbed wire with armed guards all the time. Pass by there and see these old men sitting around the benches and sitting on tables and in general being idle and persecuted. And you go on a little bit further around the island, and you come to a place, Cocoa Head. It's an embayment there. It's quite a nice swimming place. You go on around there, they had an Italian POW camp. They didn't even have a guard over them. They let them go wherever they wanted to. And of course, the Italians have just a whole lot rather been there than to been home. Things are going on at home. But they caught them early in the war, transferred them out there. And they did public works and agricultural type things and a little bit of military type construction. Lived with their own people in a bunch of barracks over there. And I don't know what the government was of that particular group. I guess they had some American officer or somebody's over the whole shebang, but in general they did and went wherever they pleased. One time I was in the Chief Petty Officer Club doing what most Chief Petty Officers did, drink a little beer. And they had a pretty good three-piece band there, white hats that come over and entertained us for a fee. So somewhere in the ensuing musical program, they played the Hawaiian War Chant. And there was a guy sitting at the table that I was at. Normally the tables, people would gang up, it'd be 5 or 6 people sitting at one table. And as was tradition then, everybody would buy a round of drinks, and no exception. If you had to leave early, it was the proper thing to do was to buy a round when you left. Of course, all that changed by the time the Korean War come along. And had to watch then, somebody would pick your money up off the table. Whole nother world. But anyway, back to the Hawaiian War Chant. It was going along pretty good, and there's a guy sitting at this table. He was a chief named Andy Anderson. And he was singing the Hawaiian War Chant with great vigor and great beauty. if you can imagine that song having much beauty about it, but it was a real fine song anyway. I guess beauty's in the eye of the beholder, somebody other said. Well, I thought it was good. So he was really turned into that. He went from one verse to the another, to the another, to the another. And when he got through, there was almost a standing ovation throughout the place. One of the musicians had brought a microphone over and stuck in front of his face, so he was drunk enough and carried away enough till he sang right over the microphone, and he done it good. So after the song was over and the applause stopped, I said to him across the table, I says, Andy, you know you're pretty good on that. And he grinned a little bit, and some guy sitting alongside me says, he ought to be. He wrote the song. The local scene out in the city of Honolulu was something to behold. And some Army General, Richardson, I believe it was, he was morally bound to do something about the opening of the city. So he declared all these places out of bounds till east infringement. There's one huge house of ill repute there. Was not uncommon to see enlisted men standing outside reading Stars and Stripes as the line moved up. They had an officer's day. no enlisted people. The Episcopalian bishop. Right, I'm sure, by discouraging that type of activity. There was one young girl there who got into political hot water out there. Her name was Jean O'Hara, and she was the Bishop of Chicago's daughter. And she had gotten out there on some scam somebody had sent, given trips out there for those that sells the most magazines or something of that nature, and she got out there and got stranded, she said. And she became involved in prostitution. So, as time goes on, the territorial government licensed these girls and tried to shake them down and did, I guess, at every turn. So she fell in love with an Army Major, Schofield Barracks, and married him. So I put her out of business, and pretty soon he goes out on some invasion from there, left there. And the day after he left, the territorial police came and took her and made her relicense and go back to work. She tried to get out on Matson steamship lines, but all people leaving there had to check in with the port authorities, so they never would let her leave. So she had but one thing to do, and that was to remain there. So she I guess liked the business all right, but decided that she'd had enough of it. She was going to write a book and expose the whole shebang of them. Well, that didn't go over very big. She went to the newspaper there to try to get it printed. She had money for obvious reasons, and they wouldn't print it. They was afraid to touch it. So nobody in the island wouldn't print it, so she bought herself a multi-lift printing press and set it up in a little shack out of Pearl City and printed it herself and stapled it together. And it told the it told the lowdown on the whole works of them out there, all the authorities. It was not a pretty picture. So in time, the war was over and the major came back. So they started living together legitimately, I guess. And when I was back in, I passed through there 5 years later, and I had been called back to the Navy. I inquired what was the status of Jean O'Hara. Some local there said, "You see that bridge on over there in the Elephant Hut that took over some buildings the city had in in the old air station, some of the old Quonset huts. He says, that's Gino Harris beer joint. I said, what happened to the major? He says, her and her latest boyfriend killed him. And they found him laying in the Kihei Lagoon down there. So they never convicted her of it. And I imagine that she has since got rich again and retired. Maybe hasn't. She'd be pretty old, 75, I guess. Due to the shortage of qualified bus drivers and people that skill, all the bus lines out there was military bus lines. They probably had a transit authority name on them, but they were driven by GIs. And they were good. They were excellent drivers. And they, big, nice, modern buses, always loaded. And they ran as far as Schofield and covered all the municipal areas in and around Honolulu and over to Kaneohe. So had a real good bus service up to Wheeler Field, of course. I think one of the biggest shocks of my military career there in World War II was shortly after I reported on the station there. I ran into an old boy that I knew real good. He's from Denver, incidentally. His name was Gentry. And Gentry said, let's go get a drink somewhere. And I said, well, where can we do that? He said, never mind. Says, I got a Jeep, access to a Jeep out here. We'll go get a bottle. So we went driving the air station itself, as was common with all that type of facilities there. I rode around the perimeter of it, and the bus ran continually, and you'd swing off the bus or swing onto it. It'd slow down a little bit. So it went round and around. So we get on this road with this Jeep. We go around. We stopped in front of the Master of Arms for the station. That, of course, to the non-indoctrinated would be the chief police officer of the station, as to traffic and that type of thing. So he says, come on, don't ask no questions. So he and I went in this place. It was just crowded with a bunch of non-coms, 2 or 3 officers, obviously in charge, sitting in the background in little offices, and 20 or 30 white hats working the counters there. And he goes up and I asked him what he wanted. He says, I want a 5th of whiskey. Named the brand. Somebody goes to the back of the place, brings out a bottle. He pays them for it. We get in the Jeep and leave. They were being supplied by the flight attendants on the big airplanes that's going back and forth. So they'd buy cheap whiskey in San Francisco and bring it out there and sell it for $40 or $50 a 5th. Quite lucrative. Something comes to mind concerning Commodore Ingalls, who I have mentioned several times previously, and I'll mention something else about him. There's a little known fact. He was World War I naval ace. And of course, as you know, the United States did not get any airplanes into combat in World War I. Many organizations were over there, including Rickenbackers and all the other big aces, but they flew British or French airplanes. And he was no exception. Old Ingalls wasn't. So his name, in fact, was David S. Ingalls. And he was situated with some British outfit there. And he shot down 8 German planes. And I didn't know that at the time I was out there. It's been a recent time that I ran into that. He apparently was a modest man, or else it would have been better known than that. Everybody knew he'd been Hoover's Secretary of the Navy, but they didn't think of him as having an illustrious military background. We had a RFID pilot out there who took keen delight in wearing his Union Pacific, wait a minute, I mean Santa Fe, excuse me, his Santa Fe Railroad Engineer's cap. He had been an engineer on the Santa Fe Railroad. And, well, they had the airmen then, like airmen have always been, kind of independent and do as they sort of please. Another, perhaps little-known fact, that when World War II broke out, the Navy and Marine Corps both had numerous enlisted pilots. There's a reason for that, and the main one being that they didn't want to pay the necessary money for officers. They didn't have much money to operate on. So there was an awful lot of enlisted pilots, and they were excellent. All of them just about had long years of experience in all types of aircraft. And they had survived. That within itself a test of their ability. So a lot of these enlisted pilots, it started with the grade of first class. And there wasn't nothing any lower than the first class. There's an awful lot of chief air pilots. We had one on our base who was a first class, a white hat. And he had so many hours that he was the plane commander. And on one occasion I've seen his crew go out to board this R5 to bring it to the States or wherever they were going. And he was the captain on the plane. And he had a commander, full commander, as his co-pilot. And I don't know who enjoyed that the most, him or me, seeing it. Anyway, I thought it was unique. But as the war wore on, except for the incorrigibles, most all the enlisted pilots were given rank, normally fairly high, like lieutenant commanders or maybe lieutenant JGs up, let's say. And the Marines would be maybe majors, a few captains, and continued as commissioned officers. After the war, in order to stay in, a lot of them reverted back to their enlisted status. You see, they in the chain of commands, I guess they've always done that, and I guess they always will. They, on an officer, when you advance to the rank of lieutenant commander, you go before an officer's board of examination. And it always was then comprised of Annapolis people. And it was rare, if ever, that a Mustang, that is somebody came up from the ranks, or a reserve, had been called for various reasons, ever got past that rank. So they were given about 4 years or something after these examinations, at which time they were automatically retired or no longer on the payroll, let's put it like that. So they could revert back to enlisted grades and remain in. And by then, they would make about as much money as master sergeants. Most of them went back as master sergeants and continued on flying. It helped the budget and helped them stay in. It was one which I ran into, which I'll give an account of in my Korean War experience. It was a sad story. You know, I won't get into that at this time. I should have said either as master sergeants for the Marine Corps or chief petty officers in the Navy. There was one mapping experience that I must relate before it escapes me. On one occasion, I did a map like no other that I ever worked on. I believe that it would prove out to be Kyushu, Japan. I probably am not pronouncing that correctly. But it was a big industrial town in Japan. And it had three prominent mountain peaks. One or maybe more was of smoking volcanoes, dormant but smoking a little bit. I don't know the eruption history on them, but they weren't in eruption. There's always an industrial smog over this big complex of Japanese shipbuilding or whatever they were making below. And we worked out a plan to use them three peaks as pylons. They were very sharp. And planes would circle those three peaks and fly certain courses and make certain turns and be over the target area and bomb the hell out of them. And I later heard some officers discussing it. They said that it appeared to have worked pretty good. They didn't have the benefit of some of these sophisticated things which later came along. But they did work out a pretty good engineering type distance and course there that worked for them. The advent of radar was an interesting thing. Some of the planes in the Aleutians were just getting shot all to hell up there, and they didn't know why. They didn't think the Japs was that good. The Japs had guns aimed with radar. So our people, once that was discovered, and they, prior to that, probably had been working on radar, but the original discovery in the U.S. forces that led to the experimentation that brought it on, is two GIs was working on some tower someplace, and they were transmitting very high frequencies over it, trying to experiment with some experiment they were conducting. And this one guy was working in close quarters there, and this device was on. Them days and times they didn't know anything about radiation or anything of that sort that might damage you. Anyway, I don't guess the government would have cared too much. But he had a Hershey chocolate bar in his rear pocket. And it was cold, in a cold climate, Alaska, I believe. And when he reached for his first candy bar, it was melted. So he put two and two together and figured out that transmission was melting that. So they learned a little bit from that. Learned how to operate those high frequencies and what they would do. From the early warfare at Pearl Harbor, I thought it was interesting that throughout the war, and for that matter even yet, there's oil seeping from some of the sunken ships there, the Arizona being one of them. They went down with their cargo of oil, and it keeps coming out, but there was so much oil from the explosions and everything, it blew the ships apart at Pearl Harbor. They had to keep the harbor skimmed, so they had a pretty ingenious vacuum type situation with motors on a barge that they would self-propelled barge would go around there and suck up all in still water pools. When it was rough, you couldn't do it, of course. But it was a pretty protected harbor. So I was out there skimming all the time. It looked like there's several of them that run in tandem side by side and make a sweep across and come back. And that went on the entire time that I was around there. You see them doing that. Along the mapping angle, it would be of interest, I believe, to mention that each Japanese warrior in the Zeros was given a little map which had his target and his secondary target and so on identified on it. And the characters, of course, were written in Japanese, identifying the ship as the Arizona, Oklahoma, or whoever. The map on which those annotations were made was reproductions of a Coast and Geodetic, United States Coast and Geodetic Survey harbor chart. Shortly after the war, it was for sale at some of the souvenir shops down in Waikiki, but I wanted one, but I never got the right place, the right time. They used to sell glossy photographs of one that come out of some plane that they had shot down. But I thought it was unique in that well, it was customary to give all friendly nations 2 copies of every chart that you put out, and of course that wasn't classified at that time, and they had it. I saw another interesting map out there. It still was wet with seawater when the intelligence people got it, and they forwarded it on to us, and we examined it or copied some parts of it or something. But it was a Dutch map down in Sumatra somewhere that had been sent in from some jet plane had been shot down. And they did some awful good mapping. They had some unique things like any around those rough volcanic islands, the huge mountains and so on, any prominent point on the sea coast or anything that was consistently used as a landmark, they had a magnetic compass rose put over it, centered on it. So any line you drew out from that would be a magnetic course. I was over at Nimitz Hill one time to pick up orders or something to go up to Schofield Barracks to see about the printing. And I came out of the building there where I'd gotten this orders, and sitting on the side of the street there was a Japanese Zero. It had a sentry there watching it. And I seen someone or other go to him, and he nodded approval, and whoever it was, one of the